So what about the fertigation? Well, in one of the trials of repeat, we have compared standard fertigation with different other fertigation strategies. And one strategy was actually to switch to rainwater, so without any nutrients anymore, in the last 2 weeks of the harvesting of the strawberries. And there was no effect on yield or on plant growth, but it had a very big effect on the remaining nutrients and the spent growing media. So we saw that actually nutrients stored in the spent growing media, they can still be taken up by plants if there are no nutrients imported with the fertigation anymore. And it was mainly potassium and phosphorus which are removed, but also to a lower extent nitrogen, then magnesium, and then calcium. And then in the table, you see the nutrient contents on n gram per kilogram dry matter. And well, you see that initially we had quite low contents of these nutrients. With the standard fertigation, in all cases, we see an increase in nutrient content, except for magnesium. But when we switch the standard fertigation to water in the last 2 weeks, we see again a clear decrease. So it means as a grower, just by switching to water in the last 2 weeks of cultivation, it can really remove a lot of nutrients from your spent growing medium, and it may allow to have a spent growing medium with a higher potential to be reused in the next cultivation. So we are again in the story of circular horticulture or recycling horticulture. When you reuse spent growing media with the leaves, you have a very nutrient-rich material, and maybe you should adapt your fertigation to have an optimal crop growth to avoid any issues for your crop. However, when you start only from the spent growing medium, you can adapt the fertigation to reduce the nutrients which are retained in the spent growing media, and it can increase actually the potential for reusing this spent growing media in the future. So then about other crops, well, of course, some crops have no spent growing media. A lot of ornamentals are sold together with the growing medium. However, we have also done trials with Via Verda, where spent growing media from strawberry were actually used for growing ornamentals, and it worked quite well. When we look at the range of different crops that are available in greenhouses, we can say that crops with a shorter cultivation, they will have younger roots, which are less stable from a biological point of view. So it means you have more decomposition activity still. So that's, I think, important to take into account. For crops with a longer cultivation cycle, there is a higher nutrient input with fertigation, and it may result in higher nutrient retention. So that's also the case, for instance, for tomato, cucumber, or chrysanthemum. So this is the graph showing on the y-axis the total potassium content of the substrate per liter of substrate. So we see that for strawberry and chrysanthemums, we have very high potassium contents in the spent growing media, while on the x-axis we have the biological stability, and there we see that short cycle crops like green microgreens, they have very low stability because of the young roots. And then we have the mushroom, spent mushroom compost, and there we see there is still a very high biological activity, but also very high nutrient contents. So the quality of spent growing media, it's really depending on the crop conditions and the crop cultivation conditions, whether you can easily reuse them or not. Okay, so this brings us to the conclusions. I would say less is more, and I will try to explain what I mean with that. Well, we have seen that when you use a growing medium once, it really the quality is not affected in a negative way. So you can really reuse this spent growing medium. But we should take into account that pathogens, weeds, and contaminants, they are really sometimes a risk, and it should be really always be taken into account. But you can sometimes do it very simple if you directly reuse the spent growing medium as a standalone material. In most cases, we had very good results for strawberry. So even if we didn't do any kind of sanitation. In terms of nutrients and biological stability, it's always a risk to include the above ground biomass. So it should be well considered when you do it. On the other hand, there is good news. If you have nutrients left in the material, they can be reused by the crop. And mainly we see that potassium, phosphorus, they are really taken up by the next crop as a fertilizer. And of course, we remember from this presentation that the amount of growing medium per plant, it's really very important in determining the nutrient balance between the two compartments. And I hope I could show you that there are many variables and variants in using horticultural substrates. So it's not that simple, of course, but there is potential. And in the case of organic horticultural substrates, I think there is really an added value because the materials can be repeatedly reused in the greenhouse, and still afterwards we can still use them as a carbon-rich soil improver. So there is no competition between both applications. And in that way, we can go towards a higher sustainability of soilless cultivation, as is explained here. The results I could present you today, they are based on 4 projects. I would really like to thank the funding agencies of these projects, but of course, all other partners which were involved in these very, very nice projects. So thank you.